I never imagined life would turn out like this. For over 30 years, I poured every ounce of myself into my family, sacrificing dreams, desires, and comforts, all for the people I loved the most. My daughter, Emma, was the center of my world. Raising her single-handedly after her father walked away meant working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, just to keep the lights on and food on the table. I gave up my career ambitions, my social life, even my health, all quietly tucked away beneath smiles and reassurances. It was just the way life was. Sacrifice, sacrifice, and then some more sacrifice. I remember quitting the marketing job I loved, the one where I was finally gaining momentum, because Emma's daycare costs surged unexpectedly, and I had to prioritize her needs over my own aspirations. That was the first big sacrifice. Then there were the countless nights I stayed up late cleaning houses for extra income, my body aching, exhausted but determined. I told myself it was temporary, that soon things would improve, that I was doing the best I could. The third sacrifice was the hardest, giving up relationships, invitations to gatherings, fleeting romances, even old friendships, all left behind as if they were luxuries I couldn't afford. There was no time or energy for myself. I learned to normalize the ache in my chest, the exhaustion from endless work, the loneliness from isolation. I told myself this was just motherhood, this was just life. Yet beneath it all, I unknowingly buried a deep hunger, the need to be seen, to be appreciated, to simply breathe, without guilt or obligation. Those emotional needs were sacrificed along with my social life. Every smile I wore was a mask concealing a quiet desperation. Financially, the picture was grim. Our apartment was modest, cramped in places where the peeling paint screamed neglect. The old furniture bore the stories of years of hardship. Bills piled up, and every unexpected expense felt like a mountain we couldn't climb. I depended on odd jobs and occasional help from friends, but mostly I carried the weight alone. Others saw me as the ever-reliable, selfless mother, the backbone of our little family, someone who could endure anything. But I saw myself as fragile, stretched thin, invisible in my own life. 2 memories haunt me still. In one, Emma was barely 4 years old. It was my birthday, but instead of celebrating, I was scrubbing bathroom tiles until my skin was raw, while she danced around unaware. I remember wiping tears from my cheek, telling myself it was fine, that my birthday was less important than everything else. Another flashback is grimmer. A night I came home drained, legs swollen from standing all day at the diner. Emma was awake, suitcase at her side, telling me she was going to stay with her father because she needed more than I could give. I begged her to stay, but her eyes looked through me, and I felt my world shatter piece by piece. Our home reflected all this. Every corner told a story of enduring. Faded curtains, the peeling wallpaper, the patched-up sofa that sunk where I sat, the mug with a chip still stained with last week's coffee. The air was thick with stale scents, masked with air fresheners that barely worked. It was a sanctuary and a prison, filled with sacrifice and silent tears. The night began quietly, with soft chatter and the gentle clinking of glasses echoing through Emma's modest apartment. The scent of jasmine from the nearby window mingled with the aroma of leftover dinner, a faint hint of garlic and spices hanging in the air. The golden glow of low lamps and strings of fairy lights wrapped the room in warmth, filling the space with familiarity and comfort. Friends laughed and shared stories, their faces light, the atmosphere casual. But beneath the surface, a tension simmered, one I hadn't anticipated. Curtis arrived first, his easy smile dimmed by a shadow of unease. Behind him came his parents, a stern couple whose presence brought a sudden chill. Their sharp eyes scanned the room, icy silence trailing behind them like a cold wind through a sunny day. The friendliness of the party dimmed instantly. Where before the air had hummed with camaraderie, now it crackled with a quiet hostility that prickled at my skin. Curtis's mother wasted no time. Her voice cut sharply through conversation, loud and cold enough to hush the room. "We're not here for fun," she proclaimed, eyes fixed with accusation. "Emma owes my son money. It's time she pays." The words came like a blow, public and humiliating. Conversations died. I could feel the collective gaze of those present locking on us, their whispered questions hanging like daggers. My heart clenched violently. Emma's face went pale. Her hand trembled over the kitchen counter as she pressed her lips together, biting back a wave of emotions. The familiar scent of lavender from her perfume seemed faint and fragile against the harsh atmosphere. Around her, curious eyes shifted uneasily, whispering, some in shock, some scornful. "I thought she was responsible," murmured one woman. "After everything her mother did," whispered a man nearby. Curtis tried to intervene softly. "Mom, please, not here." But his voice was small, drowned under his mother's relentless tone. "Enough. She's had chances. Now she must pay." His mother's words had the weight of judgment, cold and uncompromising. I stood frozen, watching the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for shrink under the assault. My hands were clammy. The cup I held wobbled as nausea twisted in my stomach. The warm comfort of freshly brewed tea was overtaken by the acrid taste of anxiety. The floor beneath me felt unsteady, swaying like a shaky raft lost at sea. The edges of my vision darkened for a moment, the world blurring like a watercolor in rain. Curtis's father stepped forward, tone final, eyes sharp. "There will be no more excuses. It's time to face the consequences." The claustrophobic room tightened with tension, the scent of stale air and sweat mingling, pressing heavily on my chest. I felt breathless, but tried to steady myself. Whispers rippled like a slow undercurrent. Friends exchanged worried glances. "She always hid a lot beneath the surface," a voice murmured. "I never imagined things would get this bad." Another added quietly, "It's hard to judge when you don't know the whole story." But pity brought no comfort against the weight of exposure. I wanted to speak, to defend Emma, to explain the years of struggle and sacrifice. But the words caught in my throat. The accusatory eyes seemed to multiply, closing me in like a cage. Curtis averted his gaze, shrinking beneath the unspoken disappointment. Emma's fragile voice tried to call out, but was smothered amidst the barrage of cold accusations. Curtis's mother leaned in, voice a venomous whisper. "You made your bed, now lie in it." The sting of those words was physical, an invisible blade cutting deep. My legs wavered beneath me. Panic surged, hot and suffocating. Tears prickled, burning behind my eyelids. Amid the crowd, a small act of kindness emerged. One of Emma's close friends bypassed the hostile circle, touching my arm softly. A quiet gesture, a lifeline of empathy. Her eyes avoided the judgmental gazes, but in that brief moment, I felt a flicker of warmth in the cold room. Yet the threat lingered, as potent and dark as the shadows creeping across the walls. Curtis's family made it clear. Until debts were paid, neither peace nor forgiveness would come. The laughter and light of earlier vanished like a fleeting dream, replaced by a suffocating weight of rejection and shame. My body tensed, caught in a battle between wanting to flee and the paralyzing grip of humiliation. Breath came fast and shallow, heart thundering alarm. I was exposed, reduced to accusations and whispers thrown like stones. The years of sacrifice, the countless quiet nights, the hidden battles. They all dissolved into silence, disregarded and dismissed. In that moment, standing silently among strangers and acquaintances turned judges, I realized the bitter truth. The ones we sacrifice for can sometimes become the cruelest of strangers. The physical pain of exposure, the collapse of trust, and the solitude mingled with rage and sorrow. That night marked a fracture, a breaking point, but nestled beneath the weight of shame, the silent ember of defiance stirred quietly, hinting at the strength yet to rise within me. The ride home after that humiliating night blurred into a haze of numbness and swirling emotions. As the city lights flickered past the car window, each one felt like a reminder of all that had been lost: security, respect, and the life I thought I'd built. My chest felt as if a heavy weight pressed down on it, making each breath shallow and labored. I sat stiffly, arms crossed, desperately holding myself together, while inside, my thoughts spiraled. Memories I'd long buried came flooding back with a painful clarity. I found myself transported to those early days, juggling multiple jobs and sacrifices, effortlessly masked as love and duty. I remembered the sunrises I greeted alone, the nights I sat awake after long shifts, too exhausted to cry. I recalled telling myself over and over that every hardship, every missed opportunity, was worth it if it meant giving Emma a better life. In that moment, however, those memories felt less like proof of love and more like chains binding me in invisible servitude. One vivid memory returned to haunt me: the afternoon in our cramped kitchen when Emma, just a child, was practicing her piano recital. I was sipping burnt coffee, barely tasting it, exhausted, but telling myself with a quiet stubbornness that all the sacrifices were necessary, that they were love in action. But the clarity in the back of my mind now whispered something different. Perhaps those sacrifices had been thorns, wrapping tightly around my own dreams and freedom. Another memory pressed even deeper. Emma packing her suitcase one cold night, her eyes distant and resigned. She told me she needed to live with her father, that I couldn't give her enough, couldn't be enough. I begged, pleaded, promised change, but she was set and unwavering. At the time, I thought the fault was mine, that if only I tried harder, loved more, she would stay. Now I saw it from a different light. Love without boundaries can become a prison, trapping not just others, but ourselves. This sudden emotional clarity was both painful and freeing. I recognized the pattern I'd lived for decades, a cycle of self-sacrifice never balanced by care or recognition from those I gave to. My voice, long swallowed by obligation and silence, finally stirred, awakened by something fierce inside that refused to be ignored any longer. The sting of betrayal bit sharply, not only from those who openly rejected me, but from my own quiet acceptance of invisibility and self-denial. The ache settled deep within my bones, fueling a fire that both scared and emboldened me. In that dark and restless hour, a decision thundered inside my heart. I resolved, suddenly and irrevocably, to reclaim myself. No more would I be the invisible martyr, endlessly giving, endlessly unseen. The choice felt reckless, impulsive even. But it was a spark igniting a flame I thought extinguished long ago. Stepping into my apartment, the familiar scent of aged wood, faded curtains, and worn upholstery greeted me like a ghost from a life past. The small space was cluttered with relics of my neglected self. Unpaid bills stacked beside half-read books, old photographs faded at the edges. The peeling wallpaper in the corner, its frayed edges softening into the wall, was a subtle but brutal mirror of my own worn facade. I sank onto the battered sofa, stiff and weary, the cushions worn but offering a chilly comfort. The dim, flickering light overhead felt unstable, like my own fragile state. This was the space I'd escaped to, a sanctuary and a prison both, filled with silent memories and unspoken regrets. In the stillness, those past moments, once whispered comforts, became confrontations. They demanded acknowledgement rather than quiet endurance. The nights I'd been too tired to dream, the birthdays forgotten, the love that wasn't enough. Sacrifice, once adorned with pride, now lingered bitter and hollow in my mouth. Yet beneath that bitterness something flickered, an ember of hope, a fragile light. Despite the storm of pain and doubt, my mind began sketching out possibilities, tentative steps toward reclaiming a self worn thin by years of erosion. The future was uncertain, edged with fears, but also touched by the faintest hints of new beginnings. The transition was not smooth. Fear gnawed at me. Fear of loneliness, failure, and the unknown. High waves of desperation crashed against my resolve. The temptation to sink back into invisible martyrdom beckoned like an old, familiar ghost. But stronger than those fears was a burgeoning certainty. I deserved to matter. Not just as a caretaker or sacrifice, but as myself, worthy, visible, and whole. I drew a deep, steadying breath. The tension that had coiled tightly in my chest eased slightly, replaced by a fragile calm. In that moment, the seed of transformation was planted. The path ahead was lined with uncertainty and daunting challenges. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I was ready to walk forward, toward a life where I could reclaim my place, my voice, and my worth. Days passed after that night, and I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. The weight of humiliation still pressed heavily against my chest, but beneath the suffocating layers of despair, a slow-burning ember of determination began to glow. I knew that staying locked in the cycle of submission, loss, and invisibility was no longer an option. Something in me urged for change, not explosive or violent, but quiet and resolute. The moment to act came unexpectedly. It wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic confrontation, but rather a calculated step born from many sleepless nights and whispered thoughts to myself. Sitting quietly one morning, I realized that reclaiming my dignity wouldn't happen through words alone. It would require action, and the first action would have to be mine, alone and deliberate. I decided to withdraw from the suffocating atmosphere that had clung to me for years. I changed my phone number silently, knowing the calls from those who exploited me would persist if I didn't. I stopped responding to messages and invitations that drained rather than uplifted. The ritual was quiet, yet revolutionary, building invisible walls where before there had only been open wounds. One afternoon, I organized the important papers I had scattered across the battered kitchen table. Overdue bills, tax statements, mortgage information, and some documents I had tucked away without much thought. The process felt like sifting through my past mistakes and long-held burdens. But among the piles, something caught my eye. An old bank statement connected to an account I had almost forgotten. Hesitant but intrigued, I started digging deeper. I discovered more than I expected. A secret stash of savings, quietly accumulated over the years from small investments and frugal living. A hidden fortune I had never disclosed to anyone. It was money I had stashed away as a kind of invisible safety net. A safety net that had grown far beyond what I had anticipated. The realization flooded me with a complex blend of emotions: shock, relief, shame, and strangely, hope. This hidden fortune symbolized something much deeper than wealth. It was proof that I had agency, that beneath years of sacrifice and invisibility, a part of me had resisted, had saved and prepared for a future where I might reclaim my life. That money was the physical manifestation of my worth, unacknowledged but real. With this newfound resource, I began drawing the first sketches of my plan. I wasn't seeking revenge, nor was I plotting grand theatrical gestures. My plan was simple: to regain control over my own life, to create boundaries where none had existed, and to let go of those who had fed off my silence. The first concrete act was closing the lines of communication to those who had exploited my kindness and generosity. When Curtis and his parents tried to reach me for their usual demands, I did not answer. When my daughter sent texts filled with accusations and guilt, I left them unread. The silence on my end was deafening, yet it was filled with strength. My actions bewildered those accustomed to my acquiescence. Conversations stopped abruptly. Messages turned terse and confused. I watched, almost detached, as the web of control others had spun around me began to unravel. To them I was acting irrational, selfish, even heartless. But inside, a quiet victory bloomed. Alongside these changes, I treated myself with newfound care. I took long baths, scented with lavender, nursed my aching body with rest instead of endless work, and spent lazy mornings reading books I had shelved for years. This slow reclaiming of self was as important as any step taken against the world. The physical sensations of this shift were as profound as the emotional ones. I felt muscles once tight with anxiety loosen and relax. My breath deepened, no longer shallow and panicked, but steady and nourishing. Sleep returned in peaceful waves instead of fragmented gobbets steeped in nightmares. One afternoon, as I folded a clean sheet onto my bed, I caught my reflection in the window. I saw a woman aging but still radiant in ways no one could touch. There was a softness in my eyes, a glint of resolve born from storms weathered and strength reclaimed. This reflected change wasn't only about circumstance, it was about reclaiming my inner world. The small victories during this time became milestones. I paid off a few old debts quietly, no fanfare or announcement, just a quiet reclaiming of responsibility on my terms. I set up a simple budget to rebuild finances with the hidden savings, and more importantly, instituted limits on how much emotional and physical energy I extended to others. One day I found myself staring at the front door, with firmness not born of anger but of self-respect. For years that threshold had represented a gateway to endless demands, judgment, and sacrifice. Now, it was the boundary I guarded fiercely. This was a new chapter, a conscious breaking of patterns that had defined me for too long. The quiet rebellion grew each day, steady and sure, until it shaped not only my actions, but the atmosphere around me. The reverberations were subtle but undeniable. Even Curtis's reaction to my shift underscored the magnitude of change. When he tried to confront me about the distance I was creating, I met him with calm but firm words that left no room for argument. The shock on his face was palpable, the control he'd once held silently slipping. My boundaries were respected, begrudgingly at first and then more fully. The power balance in all my relationships shifted imperceptibly but irreversibly. I was no longer the endless giver drained for the benefit of others, but a woman steady in her newfound strength. This break from submission was not without doubt. I faced moments when the old fears whispered in the shadows. Will I be alone? Will I lose what little I have? But each time I acknowledged those fears and chose to act anyway, a deeper courage grew. No dramatic showdown had marked this beginning, no shouting matches or explosive fights. Instead, my revolution was built on steadfast resolve and quiet actions that changed the course of my story, gently but surely. Every step reaffirmed my worth. Every boundary built a safer space for my heart. The woman I once dismissed as invisible had broken free, not loudly but powerfully, calmly, and with a clear sense of purpose. This new path would demand patience, resilience, and sometimes sorrow. But it was mine, forged from the ashes of my pain and strengthened by the promise of a future I would now create for myself. The pushback against my newfound independence was swift, insistent, and emotionally exhausting. Curtis's parents began their campaign to weave me back into their web of control with strategic precision. The first assault came in the form of calls, early mornings filled with heavy accusations, guilt-laden pleas, and veiled threats. Each message was carefully crafted to unsettle me, to force compliance by preying on ingrained feelings of duty and familial obligation. "How could you abandon Emma like this?" one demanded, dripping with judgment. "You're forgetting everything your sacrifices have earned. Don't be ungrateful," read another. Despite the storm of voices trying to drag me back, I remained resolute. I did not respond. I let their calls go unanswered and blocked their numbers when necessary, shutting down the line of communication with a quiet but firm finality. They tried every reasonable and unreasonable tactic. Emotional manipulation disguised as concern, insinuations of selfishness and ungratefulness, all underscored by threats thinly veiled as warnings. But I held steady, grounded in the silent strength birthed from years of invisibility and sacrifice. Then came the unannounced visit from Curtis's mother, a well-coiffed woman whose very presence exuded entitlement and scorn. She didn't waste time with pleasantries or pretense. Her voice was sharp, bristling with venom as she unleashed a litany of accusations that I was selfish, damaging the family, and betraying her son. Her words spilled out rapidly, each one a prick intended to pierce my resolve and fill me with guilt. I listened, not passively, but with a calm I'll admit surprised even me. The flood of familiar condemnations, the old narratives of selfishness and neglect forged to keep me small and compliant, washed over me but no longer crushed me. I met her gaze steadily and spoke clearly. What I'm choosing now is self-respect. I am stepping into who I am, not who you've wanted me to be. Her expression flickered between disbelief and anger, and without another word, she left. That moment was significant, a defiant breaking point. I understood then that their fury was the last defensive stand of those losing control over me. Not all opposition came from enemies. A former close friend, one who had stood by me during the hardest years, reached out, her voice mingling concern with reproach. She was conflicted, struggling to reconcile the woman she knew with the boundaries I was establishing. "Isn't family loyalty important?" she questioned gently. "Aren't you worried about the consequences?" Her words echoed the expectations and judgments I'd internalized for so long. Our conversation was tense. She could not fully grasp my refusal to surrender again to the cycle of invisibility, where love wasn't always reciprocal. Her concern risked slipping into judgment, but I stood firm, explaining that I was no longer willing to be complicit in a relationship that left my needs unvoiced and unmet. As her call ended, I sat with a heavy but clear heart. The realization that even those closest could harbor doubts or misunderstand challenged my resilience, but it also strengthened it. I chose myself first, no matter the loneliness. Isolation became a companion during those weeks, often unwelcome and sharp. The quiet absence of calls from family and friends I had long known, a silence louder than any accusation, gnawed at me. Nights alone invited the creeping return of doubt, the seductive whisper that perhaps surrender was easier. But in that solitude, I discovered a quiet resilience. I reached out to support groups for women rebuilding from toxic dynamics, finding solace amongst strangers who understood my pain and my fight. Meanwhile, the practical aspects of reclaiming my life unfolded meticulously. I opened a new private bank account, tucked away my secret savings, and discreetly consulted a financial advisor. Each strategic move rekindled a sense of autonomy I had thought lost forever. One evening, Curtis himself appeared unexpectedly on my doorstep, his shoulders heavy with frustration and hurt. His confrontations were less harsh than his parents', but the underlying message was clear. I was wrong for breaking patterns and refusing the role he and his family expected. He spoke of sacrifices made for the family, veiled threats of lost connections, and appeals to obligations that had bound us. I answered calmly, firmly, without bitterness. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said with conviction. "I am setting boundaries because I finally respect myself. If this changes us, then that is the path I must take. The shock on his face was palpable. For years, his silence and complicity had reinforced my invisibility. That night, a crack appeared where control once resided. The subtle shifts in power rippled outward. Curtis's parents' manipulations grew less frequent as my refusal to engage filtered through their circle and social settings. I learned to absorb snide remarks and passive-aggressive comments without reaction. A new armor fashioned from quiet strength and detachment. Saying no became a sacred act in itself. No longer caught in the web of guilt, I declined demands and expectations that once suffocated me. The power of refusal ran deep, a calm authority I wielded without apology or explanation. Each boundary was a stone building, a fortress for my peace. But the internal battles were no less daunting. Long nights brought waves of loneliness so sharp they felt physical. The ache of disconnection tested the limits of my courage. Yet instead of retreating, I sought help. Therapy, like-minded friends, communities nurturing growth and validation. One night under a spread of stars on my balcony, reflection settled within me. The broken woman I had been, the silent martyr invisible to all, felt distant. The emerging woman was marked by resilience, fierce self-awareness, and a readiness to rewrite her story. I took to journaling, pouring my boundaries, goals, and affirmations onto paper. It was a blueprint for maintaining my newfound freedom. I knew the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but armed with clarity and resolve, I welcomed it. I had become an agent of my own change, no longer defined by demands or expectations, but by my values and boundaries. The past shadows still whispered in the wings, but their power over me waned daily. Though the road ahead was uncertain, subtly and steadily, I reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and my life, one determined step at a time. I never expected the truth I stumbled upon to unravel so much of my past, shaking the very foundation of the life I had so carefully built from fragments of sacrifice and silence. It began with an old, unassuming leather-bound box I found tucked behind a stack of faded photo albums, buried deep in the cluttered closet of my apartment. I hadn't remembered placing it there, or perhaps I had purposefully hidden it away when my mind wasn't ready to face what it contained. As I sat on the worn sofa, fingers trembling, I carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of letters, yellowed with age, and tied with a faded ribbon, alongside a document folder holding bank statements, legal papers, and a folded photograph. The photograph caught my breath. The image was of my mother, smiling warmly yet with a hint of weariness, standing beside a man I recognized immediately. It was my father. Or rather, the man I had believed to be my father. The letters revealed what I had never been told. My father had led a double life. He had abandoned my mother and me under the guise of seeking better opportunities. But in truth, he had remarried and built another family. The bank statements confirmed a secret account, one that had been nurtured with substantial deposits over decades, funds he never mentioned, funds that had quietly grown far beyond anything I had imagined. Emotions crashed over me, betrayal, sadness, and a strange relief. The years of financial struggles and emotional abandonment suddenly took on a new, painful clarity. I had spent so much time blaming myself for our hardships, unaware that the resources to ease them had been diverted and hidden away. The truth raised the bitter question of whether my sacrifices were in vain, or if I had been unwittingly cast aside while my father pursued a life without us. As I sifted through the letters, the voice of my mother emerged from the past, her words filled with heartbreak, resilience, and a desperate hope that justice might one day prevail. She wrote of the pain of being kept in the dark, of the endless nights working to keep us afloat, and of the quiet strength it took to raise me alone. Her writings gave voice to the silent grief I had carried, and in them I found a kinship with her that transcended time and pain. The photograph, worn and creased, served as a poignant reminder of the man I never truly knew. The smile that once represented security and love now felt like a mask concealing years of lie and abandonment. Yet amidst the turmoil, I felt an unexpected release, a liberation from illusions that had shackled me. This discovery was not a detour, it was a turning point. Having faced and absorbed the weight of this truth, I understood that it did not imprison me, but freed me from a narrative written by others. With the knowledge of the hidden fortune, a pathway opened, a chance to reclaim not just financial independence but emotional sovereignty. That night, as silence cloaked my apartment and the city's distant lights flickered through the window, I sat alone with these revelations. The secret fortune represented more than wealth. It symbolized the deception and neglect I had endured, but also the possibility of a new beginning. The complexity of my feelings was overwhelming, a mixture of grief and tentative hope battling within me. I spent hours reflecting on the past with this new lens, reinterpreting old memories that once seemed inevitabilities of my fate. The sacrifices I had made now felt layered with betrayal, but also with undeniable strength in survival. The years of silent perseverance were no longer a story of defeat, but one of undeniable courage and resilience. This truth emboldened me. It gave context to my pain and illuminated the path ahead. I realized that the grievances and neglect I had silently borne were not my burden to carry alone. There was now a foundation upon which I could build a future rooted in self-awareness and justice. I resolved to use this information wisely, not as a weapon for retaliation but as a tool of empowerment. I reached out to legal counsel discreetly, seeking advice on how to navigate the complexities of inheritance and responsibility. It was a delicate and daunting step, one fraught with the risk of reopening wounds but necessary for claiming what was rightfully mine. Throughout this process, I wrestled with a tempest of emotions. Anger at the betrayal, sorrow for lost years, frustration at the lies, but also a gentle lifting of the weight that had long burdened my shoulders. Each new document reviewed, each conversation held in private, chipped away at the walls of denial and pain. In the quiet solitude of my apartment, I allowed myself to grieve fully for the family I thought I had, and the fractured reality unveiled. I remembered moments of hope and despair, each re-examined with painful honesty. The journey through these revelations was a solitary one, but paradoxically connected me more deeply to myself and my mother's legacy. The mix of sorrow and relief eventually settled into an empowered clarity. I understood that the truth, harsh though it was, offered a form of liberation, freedom from unseen chains and from the false narratives that had shaped my sense of self. That realization inspired me to envision a new chapter, one where my worth was no longer defined by sacrifice alone, but by ownership of my destiny and story. The hidden fortune was a beacon, not just of financial possibility, but as a symbol of reclaimed power and self-respect. In the weeks that followed, I continued to process the revelation with care, seeking moments of reflection and grounding. I shared portions of the truth cautiously with a trusted confidant, someone who offered unwavering support without judgment. Their presence helped me navigate the complex swirl of emotions and decisions. As I moved forward, I felt a profound shift. This discovery had peeled away layers of invisibility and silence, revealing the strength and resilience buried underneath. It was a quiet but seismic awakening, a moment that redefined my past and reshaped my future. With this knowledge, the final acceptance of my journey took root. No longer was I merely the woman who had sacrificed everything and been forgotten. I was a woman awakened, armed with the truth, empowered to forge a life of dignity, self-worth, and autonomy. The secret fortune was more than just money. It was a symbol of unseen strength, a testament to survival against the odds, and a foundation from which I could finally rise, unbound by the shadows of my past. I knew that confrontation was inevitable. With the weight of hidden truths and newfound resolve pressing hard against me, I prepared for the moment I would face him, the man who had shaped so many years of pain, absence, and silence, the man who had betrayed not only my mother and me, but the very idea of trust I had once clung to. The day arrived on a cold, gray morning when the sky hung low, heavy with clouds, mirroring the storm inside me. I stood at the doorway of my apartment, heart pounding, muscles taut with anticipation. The worn wood beneath my feet grounded me, its familiarity steadying my resolve as I awaited his arrival. When the doorbell rang, it echoed like a toll, a summons to reckoning. I opened the door to find him standing there, older than I remembered, his face marked by time, but his eyes sharp and calculating as ever. The mask of detachment he wore barely concealed the tension underneath. He stepped inside, reluctantly following, the weight of unspoken grievances between us palpable in the cramped space. The silence stretched long, heavy and deafening. I swallowed hard, then broke the quiet. "We need to talk," I said, voice steady but charged with years of bottled emotions. He nodded, eyes darkening. "I'm listening," he replied curtly. I didn't waste words. "I know everything," I began. "About the double life, the secret accounts, the years you chose to forsake us." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "For decades," I continued, "I lived in sacrifice, struggling while you built a life without us. I believed you abandoned us to better our future. Instead, you abandoned us without truth, without care." He opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, but I cut him off, voice rising. "You hold the power you promised, but wielded it as neglect. You hid behind silence and lies." The room seemed to shrink with the weight of my words. Time weighed heavy between us, breaths shallow and hard to come by. Then his expression wavered, Not with mercy, but with something darker, frustration, anger, perhaps shame. Do you think this changes what I've done? You were never left alone by choice. Life happened. Circumstances were complicated. What happened was betrayal. The question isn't what life did to you. It's why you left us behind. Why you built walls so high we could never reach you. I said with quiet fury. He shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting away for a flicker of a moment. I breathed deeply, anger giving way to a different determination. This ends now, I said firmly. Your control over our lives is done. I am reclaiming what you took, what you ignored. There's no need for this animosity, he retorted, voice low. No, I replied, stepping forward. There is everything to resolve. I won't seek your approval or your forgiveness. I'm claiming my life. His mouth opened as if to argue, but I held up a hand, stopping him cold. After a long moment, I said, I'm done being invisible, done sacrificing without recognition. I'm free now, not because of you, but despite you. He looked at me for a long time, frustration, disbelief, maybe something like respect flickering behind the coldness. Without another word, he turned and left, the door closing with a finality that echoed in the hollow spaces he once inhabited in my life. I stood alone in the quiet aftermath, chest heavy but heart lighter. The confrontation wasn't comfortable or peaceful, but it was the rupture I needed. A break from old patterns, toxic echoes, and silenced pain. As I closed the door behind him, I felt a profound shift within. The air around me seemed clearer, lighter. I no longer carried the weight of his choices or his silence. The woman who once bowed beneath the burden of his absence stood taller, steadier, reborn through the strength of her own voice. Days afterward, I walked through my apartment, touching the corners and walls that had held so much pain and resilience. The scars remained, but their power diminished. I replaced the shadows of past neglect with light and intention, small acts symbolizing new beginnings. I began to fill the space with symbols of strength, photographs of myself smiling freely, journals in which I poured my truth, plants brightening windowsills, life pushing through cracks of old wounds. My interactions with others changed, too. No longer apologizing for my place, I spoke with clarity and confidence. When old acquaintances questioned or challenged me, I met them not with anger, but with quiet assertiveness that demanded respect. I found peace not in confrontation alone, but in the ongoing choice to live authentically, with boundaries intact and heart open. The confrontation had been a necessary storm, but the calm that followed was my true victory. That journey was neither swift nor simple. It tested every fiber of my being, forcing me to confront long-buried fears and resentments. But I emerged forged anew, not unscathed, but unbroken. The phrase that lingered, a mantra etched into my soul, was one I spoke quietly to myself on sleepless nights. I am my own salvation. This confrontation was less about winning and more about reclaiming. It was the act that severed the last ties of control and invisibility, allowing me to step fully into my power. I walked away from the encounter without a backward glance, the finality of that moment searing itself into my core. It marked the end of one chapter and the start of another, one I authored with purpose and unyielding courage. And as I moved forward, I understood deeply and irrevocably that liberation is born not from others' acceptance, but from embracing one's own truth, no matter how hard. The chains had been broken, not with violence or desperation, but with steady, unshakable resolve. The woman I once was had shattered. The woman I had become stood tall, free, and whole. The days that followed my final confrontation felt like crossing a threshold from one life into another. As I returned to my apartment each evening, the space seemed to breathe with me, gradually transforming from a place of shadow and silence into one filled with light and possibility. The weight that had pressed down on me for so long began to lift, revealing a landscape both new and deeply familiar, the true terrain of who I was becoming. I started to reshape my environment in gentle, deliberate ways. The heavy curtains that once blocked out the world now moved aside to welcome in soft, forgiving sunlight. I placed fresh plants throughout the rooms, green shoots that symbolized growth and resilience, careful with each pot and leaf as if nurturing pieces of my own healing. The air carried the soothing scents of lavender and citrus, choices made consciously to calm my mind and clear the fog of past grief. Each morning, a simple ritual grounded me, lighting a single candle to mark not just the start of a day, but the ongoing rekindling of hope and self-love. That tiny flame flickered in quiet defiance against years of darkness, a ritual that became a daily affirmation of my worth and my right to reclaim happiness. With this new inner peace, my relationships began to change too. I found myself drawn toward people who embraced mutual respect and kindness, those who saw me not as a caregiver or a shadow to be ignored, but as a whole, vibrant person, worthy of care and reciprocity. These new connections were gentle and nourishing, spaces where vulnerability was met with compassion, and strength was celebrated rather than taken for granted. Over cups of tea and long conversations, laughter returned to my life, a precious sound I hadn't heard in years. It came not from fleeting moments of joy, but from a deeper place within, a quiet celebration of freedom from invisible chains. Each smile, each shared story, cultivated hope within me, fueling a vision of a future I had once thought impossible. I allowed myself to look back on the past, not with bitterness or regret, but with acceptance. The wounds and betrayals that had once defined me became lessons, reminders of strength forged in adversity. They no longer held dominion over my present, but enriched it, providing clarity and compassion I hadn't known I possessed. Looking forward, I felt a burgeoning hope, steadfast and real. The path ahead was undefined but alive with potential, a life where authenticity and balance would replace silence and sacrifice. I began envisioning days rooted in self-respect and joy, guided by the hard-won wisdom of survival. In a moment of quiet reflection, I stood in my sunlit living room, arms outstretched toward the rising light filtering through the windows. The woman who had been cast out, ignored, and betrayed was still a part of me, but she was no longer the whole story. I was no longer defined by loss or invisibility, but by the fierce courage to reclaim my voice and live fully. Whispering softly to myself, I made a promise. I own my story, and I will write the coming chapters with courage, compassion, and love. This vow was not just words, but a lifeline, a commitment to honoring my journey and embracing the life I deserved. That promise carried me forward, a beacon in moments of doubt and a reminder of my power. It marked the start of a new chapter, one where I am seen, valued, and truly alive. My story, once overshadowed by sacrifice and silence, now shines with the radiance of self-determination and hope.